I don't know about anybody else, but I was enraptured by that. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Earshot Professional Development webinar. If you don't know me by now, my name is LaRob K. Rafael. I'm the Director of Composer Advancement with the American Composers Orchestra. And this webinar is part of our Earshot initiatives, Earshot being the nation's first systemic program for building relationships between orchestras and composers. And through our earshot readings, collaboratory residencies, consortium commissions, publishing, and professional development sessions like the one you're witnessing right now, earshot expands the definition of American orchestral music to ensure a vibrant and inclusive future for the field. Earshot is operated in partnership with the League of American Orchestras, New Music USA, and the American Composers Forum, and lead support is provided from the From Music Foundation. For more on all of our professional development series and all of our other earshot programs, you can visit americancomposers.org. A couple of things as we move through today's session. Please feel free to offer any questions that you might have for myself or our guests using the Q&A function here on Zoom. That'll be the easiest way for me to see them. And of course, if you'd like to come on screen to ask your question at the end of today's presentation, feel free to use the hand raise function here on Zoom when the time is right, and we'll try to bring as many of you on screen as possible. I'll also be offering a survey in the chat at the conclusion of today's discussion. So if you wouldn't mind clicking that link when it appears and offering your feedback is much appreciated. So today's webinar, if the video that you watched just now was not any indication, we're talking about things beyond bars, creating non-traditional scores and parts, which hopes to explore the growing role of graphic notation, improvisation, and alternative score making in contemporary music. For many composers, notation is treated as a neutral idea, but every score is really just a system of communication. It's a system of invitation and sometimes even negotiation. And more ensembles and artists are embracing flexible and experimental approaches to this collaboration and performance. So I thought it best to bring two experts in this field into the conversation to explore how composers can successfully navigate and creatively thrive within this expanding corner of new music. Our first guest today is Molly Irene, who is a composer, a vocalist, an interdisciplinary artist whose work blends experimental music, improvisation, theater, and multimedia storytelling. Her practice often explores embodiment, memory, and ritual, creating immersive performance experiences that challenge traditional boundaries between performer, audience, and score. And our second guest is Mazz Swift, a composer, a violinist, a vocalist, an educator known for their genre-defying work that draws from improvisation, jazz, folk traditions, and Black diasporic musical practice. Mazz's work centers liberation, spirituality, and the transformative possibilities of sound. And I am so glad to talk with you both today. Thank you so much for joining me.
So happy to be here, especially with you, Molly. This is gonna be great.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
I'm
Thank you.
looking forward to this conversation. So let's just go ahead and get started with this sort of question. I want to know for you both, what was your earliest relationship to notation?
Who goes first?
Let's start with you, Molly.
Yes, my first exposure to notation was a combination of people. One was my Yamaha piano music teacher, who used, the magnets on the what is it, the dry erase whiteboard with with the permanent music in it. And so I learned to read music with piano at age 7. And then I also learned piano from my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, who taught me to hear music by ear. And she taught me about the black keys on the piano and how significant they were to Black music. So I kind of got both.
How about you,
Uh,
Max?
yeah, my first exposure it was pretty simple actually. As soon as I learned, the names of the strings on the violin and learned how to hold it and, make sound, I was just immediately exposed to the corresponding notes. It was super basic.
That's real. I think we're all there. No, you both are performers, I would say maybe first, but did you begin as an improviser when it came to your composition? Did you begin as a reader, an oral musician? How did it start for you?
Well, I was around music a lot. So we always heard it, and singing was a huge thing in my household. So I think I would say, like, that, like, the participating of music making outside of the idea of performing it happened first for me. Yeah, and then eventually, like, we all kind of decided we wanted to play different instruments, and that's when I started on the
Right.
violin.
Nice. How about you, Molly?
I was very resistant to composing. I'll be honest with you. A lot of people were like, "You have to write music if you want to make it. You have to get that skill together." And I was like, "For what? Like I can just sing other people's music. I don't need to write stuff." And then I was challenged to write with my collaborator, DJ Salah, who's a producer. He does electronic music. And he pulled me into a studio and he was like, make something. We
Hmm.
have a blank canvas. Here's something of an idea. What do you feel? And he kind of actually pushed me into it. And I didn't realize that it was something that I could do. And then I just have gotten deeper and deeper into it. So we've recorded 7 original songs. And through that process, I really realized that I liked improvisation
Mm.
as my score. I wanted to create music in the moment and then document it either afterwards or in real time. And so we'll talk more about that later. But my start was in the studio, actually.
Hmm.
And I'm
It's
sorry,
a,
I'm so sorry.
go
I
ahead.
think I misunderstood your question. So I would just say that, yeah, I think I started making up stuff musically before I thought about it as composition, and then forgot
Yeah.
about it as I got more serious about playing classical music.
Mhm.
And then much later, like after, yeah, going through my own journey, coming back to it and being
Mhm.
like, I think I want to write things down to see what other people will sound like playing them.
Yeah, that's real. I mean, you both sort of perfectly segue to my next question, which is was there a moment when standard notation stopped feeling sufficient for what you wanted to communicate?
Yeah. I guess I'll go first.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, actually, and it was very, very recently, actually. It was working for this commission for the ACO. I had done it before, which was more like, let me just mess around and see how this works with my friends who know how to work with this material. But deciding to do it this way, it was very much an aha moment because I was like, I'm so tired of like dictating every single note that this orchestra is going to play, and I was really stuck. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do this and see how it goes. Yeah.
How about you, Molly?
Yes, I had the same challenge as well. I am really interested in the organic process of I'd like to awaken musicians to show up. Um, there's something about saying, like providing a welcome space for the musician to bring their full self into the color of what we experience as an audience. And I feel like that magic is so much more rich than what I can think to notate. I feel like notation kind of limits magic, and I feel like magic is what people most desire in the audience, is to be moved. And so I feel that I want to provide that space. Not to say that notation doesn't lend to being people being moved, but I feel called to provide space for other levels of transformation, both for the musician and the audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe we'll kind of get to in this conversation is the idea of everybody being a part of the experience, not just the musicians providing for an audience, but this sort of circular experience that happens in the room together. I really appreciate that about the conversations that we've had about this. Now, when we talk about graphic or not, when we talk about non-traditional notation, that could mean a lot of things. It could mean graphic scores, it could mean instructions, it could mean conduction. How do each of you define the space that you work in? Maz?
I was trying to leave the space. So, how do we define the space in which we work? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Wow. Um, I think a lot of it comes from like what Molly said, and I 100% feel the same way about inviting people to put their own selves into the music. That's the compelling thing. So I think partially I'm coming to the table as a teacher, which has been an interesting way for me to approach working with professional musicians whose musicianship I really admire. And it's basically we're trying to use all of the tools, give them all of the tools for by which they are able to pull out these creative ideas that they have inside that they may not be able to access with the tools that they have already. So I think that's why we use symbols, on a page, and gestures, hand signals and gestures, and anything we can really to kind of shake things up so that people can come out with unexpected but very honest and authentic, like uh, ideas of their own.
Absolutely. Molly, do you feel like this the same way? Is it mostly graphic notation or cues? How do you?
I have visions of cues. I have visions of what it means to like my original score idea was to for the vocalist to replace the conductor. And it's like in the village when there's a singer or a speaker in the circle, we all respond to that call and response. We respond to the call, and the call is the singer rather than having a conductor who's like, follow this page. It's about everyone hear the call and respond to the call in real time. So I had that written into my score as a direction, is that we all become the village. we all listen to the call. We respond to the call in real time. We're not looking at static pieces of paper, wondering what bar we're at. We're responding to the singer because the singer is invoking us to go deeper, to go to another place, to go on a journey.
Absolutely. I'd love if we could maybe even take a look at a couple of your scores. Um, who would like to start? Happy to pull up any. Molly, how about we look at your score? And if you could just kind of talk to us about what it is that we're looking at, how you came up with the ideas, and what's the intention for the musicians.
Yes. So this graphic score, as you can see on the left, is a part of a larger score that is preceded with text. So the
Mhm,
text score, which I learned about through studying Pauline Oliveros,
mhm,
she wrote text scores and she wrote a piece called Sonic Meditations, which is
mhm,
an inspiration for my work. And so before we get to this graphic score, we do go through a series of rituals that kind of show us what we're going to be doing together. And at the beginning, at rehearsal one, is an invocation led by me as the vocalist. And I set the tune for the rest of the piece, which evolves from invocation to tuning a communal tuning. It goes into a ritual by rehearsal three, a call and response that builds to a ring shout. And that's the climax. And then we
mhm,
kind of taper off with a rhythm section that brings in a house beat. So the organic ring shout eventually leads us into a beat with house music. And then by the end, we taper off, we dim down to tabla and cora and voice. So I also, in the text score, mentioned that we're going to use indigenous instruments in this work. So the tabla and the cora were the two instruments that I had in our ACO rehearsal
mhm.
in January. And those are the instruments that I believe kind of connect us to source, remind us where we've come from, who we are. They're ancient instruments
Mhm.
from indigenous traditions. And then I also bring in the house music, which is electronic music. And so I try to bring both the ancient and the modern day worlds together in this piece.
One of the things that I find really interesting about looking at a graphic score is that because there's an infinite amount of ways that you could describe, what it is that you want to convey to the musicians. How do you select even just what image you're going to use to represent something? For example, you have call and response being symbolized by looks like a fraction with an O and an X. What's the decision there for you?
I wanted to use symbols that are not difficult to understand,
Hmm.
that are slightly familiar. So it's like there's a call, there's a response, X and O.
Hmm.
Um, I also, I have swirls, I have spirals, triangles, I have equal signs, I have um, swiggles, I have arrows. But I wanted to use things that hopefully don't take the mind too long to
Right.
understand what's next. It's like this kind of feels like I should do this.
Hmm.
More intuitive.
Yeah. And then you mentioned that this piece is about, a ring shout. It's supposed to evoke this. So when we're thinking about ring shout, I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about what that means for you, what it means in general, and how it kind of translates onto this page.
Yes.
Hmm.
So the ring shout is an African American tradition that came out of the Black church, that came out of my ancestry, and that is still celebrated today. A lot of folks may not know that the ring shout is touring. There are ring shouters that come out of the Gullah Geechee region of the South that are still on tour that show us how to do a ring shout. It is pretty much a song, and a round of folks who start off in a slow rhythm with a mantra or, a repeated line or call, and the responders kind of join in and follow the beat, and then it gets faster and faster and faster. And what I love about the ring shout is it reminds me of other traditions. Although it is an African American tradition, we see rings in almost every tradition around the world. We see people dancing and singing together in a circle. We see people connecting to call and response in all traditions. But I wanted to bring in a tradition I knew from my heritage in this piece. So yeah, that's a part of my glossary. I also have a glossary in my score, and I talk about the history of the ring shout, and I have some QR codes in it as well, for people to find examples of what that looks like.
I really, really find this incredibly fascinating, mostly because it's sort of a lesson in the score. You kind of get all of the information. You have the opportunity to really break down so much. And the information that you provide for the musician in the score is really cool. And I love the way that the ring shout is really encompassed by the idea that these textures kind of happen about this round in, the space of the orchestra. That's really awesome. One more question, and this is just my own curiosity. What's the meaning of the general sundial shape that you have in the score?
Yes. So I was inspired. I have a lot of different inspirations, but I was specifically inspired about the sundial and using geometry and sacred geometry to express the movement of time. And
Mm,
so we know that all scores are either built out of time or some kind of mathematical system. And so I wanted to get people more into like planetary motion and the sun moving over us, and
mhm,
us knowing that something begins and ends by the sun's rising and setting.
mhm.
So I used that as my map.
That's incredible. Thank you, Molly. Thank you for showcasing that. I wonder if we can transition over to Mazz's score and we just look at it the same way.
That's incredible, Molly.
Hmm.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah. So thought through, well thought through.
No, Maz, tell us a little bit about this piece, just in general, before we dig into the score itself. What is this piece?
Yeah, so it is the name of it is called Memory 5, uh, Freedom Initiate. So, a really brief background. There is a hand signal in Butch Morris's conduction, meaning conducted improvisation lexicon, that a conductor or a conductrix, as I like to call them, can use to tell people, oh, I liked what you did, remember that. And it's like, that's memory one, and memory two, and memory three. That you tell the orchestra, remember what you're doing right now so that you can recall it later. So Butch used to have these, he had all of these conductions that he did over the years, and he called them conduction one, conduction two, conduction three. So if you watch it, you can see, find conduction 192, and that's the name of his piece. So this is an homage to him, rather than saying it's a conduction, which it is, but it's a little bit something else. It's a memory, quote unquote. So that's that part. And the pieces that I write that include conduction in them are all memories, some things. So this is the fifth one, and it is evolving. Freedom Initiate refers to the idea of bringing this kind of highly experimental and highly subjective music and these ideas to an orchestra or group of people that may not have so much experience doing it. And so, actually, what I discovered in workshopping it is that this piece is not for the initiate, it's to prepare a person to become an initiate. At which
Wow.
point, then you become like a real student of the music in a sort of serious way. This is sort of like the intro.
Hmm.
So that's what it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, so take us into the score now. We're looking at something that is sort of separated into quadrants, but
Yeah.
how does this work? What should the musician pay attention to when they get the score?
So what the sort of rules of engagement, and I always have that for every piece I write, the rules of engagement. Actually, you start out with the music with the half moon symbol facing up. So if you want to start that way, Julia, that'd be super helpful. Right. So you have the symbol, which is, you can see the sort of four poles, the half moon, the trine, the full moon, and the chevron. You have that symbol, and for each of those symbols, you're reading to the right of it. So we're reading clockwise, but actually turning the page counterclockwise. So if uh, I guess I don't even know how to break this all down for you. The truth is that each one of these quadrants can be an entire piece on its own. And there are different ways I've thought about doing this. I think you could think of it as a movement, like each quadrant is a movement, and you can bookend it with the entire score. You can have people moving through. You can designate one person or section to take one quadrant while you designate others to do, which is kind of what I did in the live performance. And you kind of thread it all. You fold that all into conduction. So I would say that the base of the whole thing is the conduction. But
Wow.
in rehearsal, we spend a lot of time just sort of talking about, what each of these visual cues are and how we want to approach them.
Wow. And so looking at this first quadrant where it says roots,
Yeah.
how are you interpreting the sound with these images?
So that is a lot of what the discussion gets to be between the conductrix and the orchestra. Colors mean things to a lot of different people. So I talk about when I see a color, how that feels to me. And then people sort of process that through their own, lens of how they would interpret what I'm telling them. Um, and then obviously you can see that there are lighter shades of it. And what does that mean? How do you put these two things together, the lighter shade and the darker shade? Why is it vertical versus horizontal? And vice versa. Yeah, all of that. Inside of that, I have these words, or outside of that, this is all contained inside of sort of like thinking of it as like a paradigm in a way, like where these are the most important things that I'm hoping that we can meditate on, and that I hope that comes out in the music. So roots is very important. Greenland being like the land, the soil. Uh, Red blood, and then the unknown essential, because there's always something that you don't know about that is important. Maybe some people might call it God. I think of it in a lot of different
Mm.
ways. Um,
Wow.
so yeah. So we kind of meditate on those things, and ideally, that's something, when you're practicing orchestral music, you spend so much time making sure you can technically execute the notes. Make sure your left hand is good, lined up with your right hand, how your embouchure, like how you're going to do all that physically on your instrument. I always ask the orchestra to spend as much time, because there's none of that is necessary here, but you still need to spend the time really meditating on these things and what do they mean to you. So part of the rules of engagement are, please keep a journal, and sort of write in your journal what what your experience is, what you're thinking about these things, each of these symbols, and how you might, and then you sort of practice knowing that you've, like, having put names to what you feel, to what you're seeing, and then begin to understand how you would do that through your instrument. So a lot of it is a lot of self-reflection, and a lot of work away from your instrument, which I feel is really important.
I think one of the things that I'm hearing when you're explaining this too is that there's also a lot of ownership from the musician's part that, is required for this music, that you can't really separate yourself in any way from what's happening in the music. And I think that's a really interesting place for us to find ourselves in music, is
Mm.
that it just becomes something that has to be in you in order to participate. And I love the way that you've kind of created that in this score. It's so simple, but it requires so much self. I think that's really, really brilliant. Um, Moving away from the scores just for a moment, there's a name that you both mentioned, a couple of times in our discussion and even in this call and that's Butch Morris. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration from this figure?
Yeah, yeah, you go ahead, Molly. I've said a lot.
No, no. I'm sure we've had different experiences. I experienced Butch without a lot of prep. I don't know who was my friend, but it was, I don't know, 2009 when I was in New York City. A friend of mine was like, we should go to a Butch Morris jam session right now. And we showed up in a room and I sat down and did whatever he said. And I joined the group and I joined the ensemble and I loved it, but I had no prep. I didn't know what conduction was. I didn't really know Butch that well. He trusted me and let me join the ensemble on a whim. And then every time he popped up, I showed up and just kind of followed him along. I enjoyed being on that journey with him. I did maybe 3 or 4 jams with him. And they may not have actually been jams. They may have been actual performances that were supposed to be, rehearsed with the group. But I showed up as a willing vocalist and I just jumped in and did whatever. And I loved it.
Incredible.
Amazing. So my prep for Butch was working with the band Burnt Sugar, who I am still a family member of. Is a tight knit community of mostly Black artists from across all of the genres, based here in New York City. And Greg Tate is the person who started it. We can have an entire conversation on who Greg Tate is and what he contributed. But so yeah, that was a much more like a wilder version of what Butch was doing with his music, with his conduction. It was we were looking at rap and rock and jazz. Um, Grooves and things like that. It was very sort of groove oriented in its own special way. So it was a little bit wild. I like to say it was kind of unruly. And so eventually Greg invited Butch to come and play, like, do a few performances with us, and that was an eye-opening experience to work with him. He has a much more, and it's, I don't want to say classical approach because it's not. It's just I think a lot more controlled. He has a lot more control over the band and what we're doing with him. um, and so when I got to move over from working with Greg and Burnt Sugar to working inside of Butch's projects, it was a very interesting like dynamic to see. It was a lot more symphonic, definitely a lot more symphonic. No matter what the instruments were, and there were all kinds of instruments. So yeah, I mean, he really laid it down for us in a lot of ways and like changed how people think about music, and was really well respected by very well respected conductors around the world, classical and non. So yeah, he's
Wow.
huge. Yeah.
And Maz, you shared with us a document, excuse me. You shared with us a document that kind of outlined a little bit of Butch's approach to some things. I wonder if we can just kind of glance at some of this. Was this something that really informed or informs your work?
Absolutely. So this is, I made like short file of excerpts, and you can just sort of flip through these, Julia. This is the panorama. This is pedestrian. It explains to you what I mean when I give you this gesture. That's actually what Butch looked like. It's a beautiful book called The Art of Conduction that he made with some Italian collaborators. So you see this, and if you see me do that to you, it means I want you to repeat something, what you did, what someone else did, and so on and so forth. And then, yeah, graphic information. That means I'm gonna like squiggle my hand, and you follow me and make what you think that sounds like.
Hmm.
So yeah, all of these different things, and these are just like several. I think maybe 5 or 6 or 7 samples of different movements, and this was enough for me to use to do an entire like 15-minute piece or something that I did at Carnegie Hall in
Wow.
October. Yeah, this
Yeah.
plus the visuals. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the thing that I take away from this, and again, as someone who's learning in this moment, that graphic or non-traditional notation is beyond the score. It's actually, as we've discussed before, this very participatory, and requires all of you. So this is really cool to see just how Butch has inspired your work, and the ways in which conduction kind of comes into play with that non-traditional notation. Thank you, Julia. And thank you, Maz and Molly, for sharing that. I'm curious, kind of thinking back to the scores and just, the information in the scores. How do you build trust with performers when you are introducing such quote unquote unconventional notation?
Mm. Go ahead.
So I'll say my first workshop with ACO, we sat in a circle and we had a conversation. We looked at the score together. I chose to be barefoot. I just felt, and I sat on the ground, and I kind of wanted to set a tone for what it means to be together and talk about what it means to show up. So when you say bringing the whole self, oftentimes we talked about musicians as being robots, and there's something about saying be human, don't be a robot, turn off the robotic mind and turn on the human mind. There's something about like having the permission. A lot of people afterwards said, thank you for the permission. They thanked me, they had gratitude to be a part. And so I think that's really transformative too, is like when musicians can be transformed also in the work. And they're not just here to do what I command and do what is, swung at them, but like show up and be here now with us. So building trust is not easy, but laying the foundation for it is being vulnerable, is talking about your story, talking about yourself. It was inauguration and MLK Day on that day, so we all kind of locked in on like this is a really deep moment. What
Hmm.
does it mean to be together in a circle right now?
Yeah.
And I brought in some dialogue about that. So thank you
Mhm.
for that question.
Yeah. Maz, I'm curious, is there something that you wish composers understood
Mm.
about performer psychology in these situations?
Yeah, I think it's important to, and this also speaks to the trust factor. It's important to know who the artists are that you're going to be writing for. I mean, that's kind of 101 for composition anyway. But I think especially when you're working with folks who are interested in this but aren't necessarily in the comfort zone of doing it. I think it's important, yeah, just to think about the most basic things. I think the thing that you take for granted, like what do you take for granted about the way you're thinking about your music, and break that down, and allow people time to ingest that and sort of like get that into themselves. And then yeah, I love what you said, Molly, about like showing up barefoot. It's like these tiny little clues, these cues to people to for understanding what you're doing. You make yourself vulnerable. I do that a lot. I really try for that because I know how hard it is to jump out and just like look at this gobbledygook and try to make music out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to that point, I'm curious from both of you, in your experience, what would you say makes a graphic or improvised score really successful in the rehearsal space?
Yeah, I think very clear instruction. I think I the more I do this work, the more I realize like I think it's about building relationships beforehand. Like I feel very much like this is long-term work. And to like kind of already have some kind of agreement that we're gonna get uncomfortable, and that this like everything is a journey. Like it's all like one thing is leading to another. There is no final destination, but there's gonna be like the concert or whatever, which is a new way of understanding the music after hanging out and doing it without an audience. So really like a long term thinking for myself.
Absolutely. We got a question in the chat I want to kind of bring to the forefront now, but I want to also remind those who are watching that if you do have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function, or you can use the raise your hand function. And if we have time at the end, I'd love to bring some folks on to ask a couple of questions. But this one is specifically for you, Maz, and it is, how will you prepare for an orchestra to perform your score after you may not be available to assist? So I think that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, with the help of the Curtis Stewart and the ACO in general. Um, I think this is as much for the conductrix as it is for the orchestra, first of all. So The conductrix is holding it's really on their shoulders. They're holding this thing together. They are the like the doula or something, you know. So it's not like they're the most important person in the room, but they are the one that's tying it all together, and they're the ones that are sort of like the responsibility for the thing. So I think, you know, again, I'm thinking about this long term. I feel like for me, I would want to have conversations with the conductrix or conductresses, I guess is the plural of that. And yeah, I would want to have. I think it's somewhat a little bit like a yeah like a workshop kind of relationship with conductors, and then having them transmit that to the audience. I mean to the orchestra. Yeah. And then there are also, again, there are the rules of engagement and the
Right.
pictures and all of that. And I'm going to definitely use some of the things you did, Molly, because that is so great. QR code for people to like, go to a link and hear what I'm talking about. It's brilliant, really brilliant. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that I love about that, the rules of engagement and the QR codes is really that it's no different than if I were to sit down with a Mahler score. I'm really just sitting down and I have to use every while to try and inform how I'm going to perform this music. It would be insane for me as good a sight reader as I think I am to just pick up a score and decide that I'm going to sing Kindertotenlieder today. There's so much information that I feel like I need to be able to perform that music and to really embody it. And so there's really no difference. And this is again me as someone who is observing the work that you two do. There's no difference in looking at this score than it is, wanting to study something else that's more traditional or Western. So I really find this all fascinating that this is something that is happening very
Agreed.
live.
I just want to make a note on that because the only difference there is that it's not in the short, we don't have shorthand for it, you know? So
Mm,
we don't like, as a violinist, I know how to play Mozart versus how to play
right.
Bach. It's like it's like part of the education. So you
Hmm.
do have an idea of what you're coming to based on your classical training. So we're kind of
Right.
trying to give you all of that all at once. So as long
That's
as the
fair.
orchestra thinks about it the same way, then yeah, you get. I think you get the results you desire.
Hmm. Now, that kind of brings me to a question on the opposite side of that spectrum, which is how do you know how much information is too much information versus what needs to be there for the benefit of the performance?
That's a great one. I feel like I gave a lot of information. Um, and yes, there was a lot of talking about less is more between Curtis and I. And I think it's about the energy of the room. It's the musicians and how they show up, what tools they bring already. And our rehearsal, one musician was like, "Are we just supposed to groove? Is this just about groove?" And I was like, "Yes. If groove is the word, do that." Right?
Hmm.
If that's what helps you lock in is thinking of this in groove, then use groove. And
Absolutely.
so, I like having musicians ask questions. And once we get all the questions out, half the time we're like, we don't even need this score. I think we get it. I want them to feel like they can let go and not be obsessed with what's on the page, that they can, you know, transcend with the music. It's meant to do that.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Molly. I'm going to transition to some of the questions that we have, but as a transitory, as a question to get us there, how about, are there things, composers, musics, experiences that you feel composers who are trying to get into graphic notation should have, or should help develop their interest in alternative systems? What are your inspirations and who are some people you would suggest listening to or studying to get into non-traditional notation?
Yeah, aside from Butch Morris, I would definitely say Matana Roberts. Their music, their were very top of mind while I was writing this piece for ACO. And Peter Evans, who mostly uses notation, but the way that he uses them, I think, are really interesting. So I say, like, if you can find a score of his, or if you find him and ask him to show you some stuff, but at least listen to his music. For sure.
Hmm.
Peter Evans is a trumpet player, and Matana Roberts plays alto sax and other instruments. And they have very different approaches to music making. I've played with both of them and all three of us together, and it's really inspiring.
Hmm.
Yes, my inspirations definitely my composition professor. I'll give a nod to Dr. Pamela Madsen, who is amazing. I studied with her in undergrad when I was studying opera, and had her class and was exposed to John Cage, who is another person that I admire as well. I get a lot out of his talk about looking for the sacred and the divine that emerges in music. And so I love reading about that through him. Also, Pauline Oliveros, and Deep Listening, the Deep Listening Institute for sure.
Hmm.
Those are some, oh, and also Dr. Yvette Jackson, who I have had the pleasure of singing their work at Harvard. So definitely look up Yvette.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you for those. A question we have from the audience is, can you talk about orchestra size with respect to these types of scores? Are there practical limits? Are the practical limits the same as in traditional scores?
I don't know what the practical limits are for traditional, quote unquote, traditional scores, but
Mm.
I would definitely say for me, I was always asking for more. I don't think there's an upper limit. You have to be smart about it, but I don't think there's an upper limit. There is kind of a lower limit because you want to have enough people to draw on. I like a quartet for me is less interesting, but not impossible. So I'm thinking like, at least octet, and up of any instrumentation.
Hmm. Molly?
Yes, I would agree on octet, two and a part. I pretty much have the voicings on my score in three, so bass and percussion, middle voices or middle instruments and treble instruments. So yeah,
Hmm.
agree.
Great question. Thank you for that. Another is, um, do both of the scores that you've presented, both of your scores, also function as parts, or are specific parts extracted from the scores that you showed?
Mhm. Yes, there are parts. When you say parts, do you mean voicings, like
Maybe just in
or
individual instruments,
sections?
instruments.
Sorry, say that again.
I think what the person means is in individual instruments. So for strings or for, the cello, how do you dictate that? Is that in the full score or are there additional extracted parts?
Yes, so in my first score, I do have a score um for each group. So there's a vocal score, there is a bass and percussion score, there's a treble score, and then I indicate what instruments I consider treble,
Mhm.
what instruments I consider middle voice, or I keep saying voice because I'm such a chorister, but bass instrumentation. So I did give a score for each.
Mm. That's cool. I
That's
can say for myself, I actually brought these things in case people wanted to see. So you can. This is the original like arts and crafts version of my score. Yeah, the whole thing it's pasted and all. But I broke out the quadrants. So we have these guys that you can look at, and then I also have just the symbol, and you can see on here I wrote Pont. This was like during the performance. I picked it up and showed it to the strings and was like pot, and just like scribbled that down. So yeah, so I did that for each of these. I just wanted to have things at my, disposal,
mm,
that would make it very clear and very easy for me to tell them what I want from them. Um, And that was like trial and error. I mean, a lot of it, like my first thing was not to break out the scores, the parts, and just to have people rotating the music, like I had said that I wanted people to do. And I think that is a great way to do it conductorless. You know, if we're not doing conduction, but just have people rotating at their own speed. But that's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, so yeah, the parts are broken out, and you can do whatever you want with it. You can pass parts out to each group and go from there.
Hmm.
Yeah. And you
Wow.
define your own sections. I try to be as non-traditional as possible, non-Western, orchestra
Right.
tradition as possible with the
Hmm.
groupings.
Another question we got was, how do you specify unison melody from any particular section um, when looking at the score?
Is that for me or Molly or both?
Both.
I think I write some explicit unison symbols. I feel like I write some fifths. I do open fifths in there. I write it in actually.
Hmm.
And because my piece is on the pentatonic scale, so it's going to happen. There's only so many pitches, so we're going to be in unison at some point,
Hmm.
which is welcome, as long as everyone knows where the tonic is, and you know we're grooving.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Some examples, I would say, like we first of all, I would say we start out assuming unison. So that's kind of how we go. But all of the parts you'll see are open clef and open transposition. Like you're free to transpose however you want. So even if you have four violins, you can all think about them and think about the notes in different places. You're not necessarily just reading this as a treble clef. You can choose your own adventure. The only thing is that I say, I will say, like, specify, like, keep the intervals between the notes.
Mm.
So if you're reading this in a specific clef, you'll keep that, like, that major second and the minor third and all of that in there, as you go, so that you still maintain the shape of it, but it has a very different harmony depending on who's playing what notes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Then there's another one I'll just say really quickly.
Yeah.
This one, which is like, this is like the first person plays and holds, and then the second person plays and holds, and you see it all gets held. Next person, so we're like, it works really well with like the horns, who are all like in a row of seven people or whatever in the back, or 10 or whatever it is. We just know like each person holds those notes, and then they cut off and they begin again at starting at the next person, and then it goes back to the beginning. So it's just, yeah, it becomes kind of a game.
Wow.
So those are the ways that I've thought of unison versus non-unison.
Mhm. We talked a little bit about the scores themselves being, non-traditional, and then, the idea of having a conductrix being the person who's kind of dictating some things. How do you also think about positioning when we're talking about this non-traditional aspect of music making? Molly, I think you mentioned at the beginning that one of the first rehearsals you had, we all sort of sat in a round. How does that translate into performance of your scores? Is that important as well for your composition?
Yes, the intention of Deliverance, it's the name of the piece, is that the audience and the musicians become one, and that we remove the hierarchy of this is where the audience sits, this is where the musicians sit. And in fact, the musicians are in order based on whatever ranking. So we kind of get rid of rank and we get rid of stage and we become what I call the collective. And I use the word the collective in the score. And so ideally, the musicians are mixed in with the audience and we are all creating the work. And if I'm clapping or snapping or I brought a chime, I'm maybe next to a violinist and that's okay. And we're gonna vibe and we're gonna give and take and we're gonna experience and create the piece together.
The mute button is always going to be my downfall. But how about you, Maz? Do you find that positioning is important to the way you create music?
Yeah, I do. I think a lot about. I love pieces that utilize the entire space of the hall wherever you're performing. You know, people having people in different places. I've thought about like gorilla people in like in the audience. You know, who you know are gonna just jump up and say a thing or sing a thing.
Love it.
I've also with this is there's so much to learn, and I'm so excited to just like I want to like get my hands in an orchestra that I can do this with for a year or something, you know, because I had an instruction like because I tried to subvert the idea of who like the rank of like first violin is the front and the sort of the leader. So I was like, the person in the back sets the tone, but in an orchestral setting, they can't hear the people in the back necessarily. So that's just something to play with. But I'm always thinking about that as well, and like how we would do that. You know.
Wow. What an incredible and important conversation that this is. At least, I mean, again, I'm just going to speak for myself because I feel like I'm learning so much from the two of you. As we sort of come to a close today, I have sort of a philosophical question maybe for both of you to answer, and that is, do you believe that scores, or maybe even the lack thereof, can function more like a social space than a fixed object?
Yes, that is, I call deliverance a sonic experience, um, because I don't want it to feel static. I want it to be dynamic. And so, yes, I do believe that the score has a life. It can continue. It can be 10 minutes. It could be 30 minutes. It could be a full hour, depending on the energy that we bring to it. So, yes.
Uh, I I mean, I think yes, but I feel like I'm thinking about it literally, and I feel like what the score is a recipe for creating the social space, you know? And it's up to interpretation, of course, so there's lessons in that as well. So yes, I guess, but also there, like, I think it's an important thing to have, to give folks ideas. Like it's a way to say, here, this is an idea I have about how you might approach music. And if you want to learn, like figure it out and then make your own based on your findings, that would be great too, you know? Yeah.
Wow. Thank you both so much for this insight. Thank you for sharing your scores with us. I learned a lot. I'm sure so many people learned a lot on who are participating with us today. Thank you for joining me in this conversation and for sharing what you've shared. And thank you all for joining us today and for checking out this professional development webinar. If you'd like to revisit any of the dialogues that we've hosted so far, feel free to check them out on our Learning Lab on our website, where you can find all of the recordings of this and all of the professional development sessions. That's AmericanComposers.org. Again, I also welcome your feedback on today's session. Please use the link in the chat to share that. It's really, really helpful for us. Thank you so much, Maz, Molly, for your time. I look forward to hearing and seeing your music very soon, and I
Such a
look
pleasure.
forward to connecting even further. Yes,
Thank you
always.
so much.
Mhm. Another huge thank you to our earshot partners, the American Composers Forum, the New Music USA, the League of American Orchestras, in addition to the many other individuals and organizations who have made earshot possible through their support. Thank you all again for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your Monday.
Thank you.